Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of The Writer's Arms. I'm again joined by my mate Ula.
Hello.
Hello, and today we're going to be talking more on Tolkien and sort of go into the Inklings as well, such as C.S. Lewis and Owen Barfield and such, and sort of the Christian apologists, because I feel like that fits in so well with Tolkien. And also,
It just gives a bit of context, doesn't it?
yeah, exactly, gives a bit of context. And furthermore, we will talk more about the Christian themes within Tolkien's work and expanding and sort of I guess bookending some of the last topics we were talking about. But speaking of bookending, the first thing I'd like to talk about is a segment that I want to put into every episode, which is just simply a housekeeping segment. Anything we forgot to mention for the last episode that was important, or any moments that we thought, would help, I guess, like clear things up. And I guess the first part I just quickly wanted to mention was we talked a lot about Tolkien's conservationism in the last episode.
Yes, indeed.
And about his themes of nature. But I felt like when talking about it, we spoke a lot about how Tolkien was loved nature and loved, was a bit of a tree hugger. But I feel like I was rereading the first couple chapters of The Fellowship, and there is a segment where they leave Buckland and go into the Old Forest. And the Old Forest is a representation, to me at least, of a blend between Tolkien's love for nature, but also that he believes that nature, is not to be toyed with, as in it is a serious thing, and that, nature and, wind and weather and all of these things are powerful. And I think the Old Forest represents that by, I believe it is Frodo who's taken by, is it Old Willow?
Old Man Willow, yes, yeah. The big old tree that I encountered before encountering Tom Bombadil, who was an entire subject.
Yeah, who could be an entire episode itself.
Yes.
But anything you want to say on the Old Forest, or any more things you want to say about Tolkien's conservationism?
But yeah, I mean, it was just really his respect for nature, I think, that he expressed in that chapter. Because it was so unpredictable, Frodo, and the entire story could have been over if Tom Bombadil wouldn't have intervened with, the tree just consuming Frodo completely. And it's just so interesting how the story can also take different turns, and also how nature needs to be respected and what kind of a power it actually is. Like, you always see, Saruman is powerful, Sauron is powerful. They have all these large standing armies. But a real danger that I also can face is just nature itself as a great power that can intervene in the story of the Lord of the Rings. It was just another bit of contrast that you see there.
Exactly.
Between all the great armies, you also have trees that apparently kind of want to kill you.
Well, in Mirkwood as well, we see that another sort of dangerous part of nature. That this place is, whilst that nature isn't loving it, it can be foreboding.
Yes. Indeed.
And that's fantastic as well. But as well, the final thing I wanted to speak on is this little housekeeping segment, and I am rambling a bit here, is C.S. Lewis's, sorry, not C.S. Lewis, we'll get to him in a moment, is Tolkien's sort of fairy theory, which is something that I thought was particularly interesting, which is the idea of the realm of the fair folk. Sort of, he wanted to encompass myths, fairy stories, and sort of those heroic romances all into one kind of theory. And the idea was that this realm of the fair folk was split into mythic kind of the mythic world. So these are distant or broad sweeps of time, or gods upon humans. So the myths of Greek gods or Norse gods. The heroic romance, with these big casts, a mix again between gods and human, covering less years and decades, and being distant, being set in a place with, humans, and as well, as I said, including countries and covering a smaller time, so Ivanhoe is a heroic romance. And finally, the fairy tale, which takes place over days, a small handful of characters, like small cottage in the woods kind of setting, and gods who only make very small appearances. Now, in especially The Hobbit, we can see that Tolkien has used these different fairy worlds and fairy stories and built them into one book, essentially, where we start in the realm of the fairy tale in Hobbiton, where, it's this small location. Gandalf, who could be considered as kind of god character, comes down, and there's the dwarves, who are kind of, I guess, small mythic characters. And then we go into sort of this big, huge myth. This we talk about the myths. In Lord of the Rings, there's a god, a god figure. There's a founding, myth of the rings of power and all of this.
Which is also has some place in the Hobbit. Bilbo finding the ring, like the orc fortress. It's
exactly.
That's where maybe like a transition is between all these different worlds.
Yeah, and furthermore, there's a bit of there's even moments of these heroic chivalrous tales with the return of the king. Like King Arthur.
Yes,
this
King
kind of,
LSR,
as we talked about in the last episode.
The once and future king.
Exactly, but the I guess, is there anything else you wanted to say on sort of that you felt we missed out last episode?
I think we covered everything else, like all the things except you've mentioned right now, quite well. I think we had a very, very good talk on some of the central themes of the Lord of the Rings. I think we can carry on to maybe the things we want to talk about in this episode.
Yes. So I think the first thing I wanted to talk about was a little sort of, I guess, like history segment, because we talked a lot about Tolkien's themes, but not about his personal life,
yes.
Which is, I would say, just as impactful as talking about his writing, because we can see where Tolkien gets all of his influences and where he comes up with these fantastic stories, and the friends who come up with fantastic stories on their own around him. And so Tolkien was part of a literary group, which I guess, literary discussion group associated with Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, who eventually writes the Chronicles of Narnia. And this was at the University of Oxford, and lasted for nearly 2 decades, lasting from the early 30s to the late 40s. The Inklings were all literary enthusiasts who praised the value of narrative in fiction and encouraged the writing of fantasy. So I guess the kind of best known members were Tolkien, Lewis, Charles Williams, and Owen Barfield. And as well, I guess there are so many more members we can talk about, such as C.S. Lewis's older brother, or other people who were guests, such as Edison and people like that. But I think the most important part of the Inklings is that they all together have the same shared interest of fairy stories and fiction, and all of this comes from a deep love of Icelandic sagas, which they would read together in pubs and things like this, which is something that
it sounds really cool. Like,
it is really sick.
You just sit down in a pub and what are we going to do today? We're going to read Icelandic sagas. I would love to do that.
Yeah, there's in fact a pub called the Eagle and Child, which is a pub that they would always meet on Tuesday mornings during term when they were all lecturers. And so as well, there's and under this idea of fairy stories and this idea of literary criticism between each other and appreciative of old works, there is a deep Christian theme within the Inklings, which is something we're going to tackle in a moment. But that C.S. Lewis was I guess after a long walk started to consider faith after he had a conversation with Tolkien. And so all of them, and even like we can talk about G.K. Chesterton and these other Christian apologists, because I feel like it all links together. But the first part before that, and I'm sorry, Ula, I'm rambling a lot, but
go ahead.
Get out some of these subjects. But there is also obviously George MacDonald, who is a gigantic figure in literature, not only English literature but in world literature, who was a person that not only Tolkien looked up to, but many people did, who was the first person to bring these classic stories and folk stories into the modern day. And George MacDonald was a little bit before Tolkien, but he also wrote Fantastes, which was a really successful book in the Victorian period, which basically was because he thought that people were being too high and lofty with their ideals, and he wanted to bring it back to stories that everyone could understand and stories that people could enjoy, because the Victorians were so fucking serious.
I mean, I can't really blame them. If you send your children to work or something. The factory floor is probably not a good place for optimism.
No. And so he writes Fantastes, which is this massive bestseller, which goes on to be read by Tolkien to C.S. Lewis. But his work exists as the same with Lewis and to some extent Tolkien in this Twilight period. This he writes a lot of stuff in Twilight and in the in between, it's not day, it's not exactly night. Anything could happen in a way. It's the in between world, such as stepping in the cabinet and going to Narnia. It's this in between, and we see this appear, in Tolkien and in C.S. Lewis's work. But I think more than anything, and I think keeping along the lines of Tolkien, and we'll talk more about C.S. Lewis, is that Ula, would you like to talk about the Christian themes of Tolkien's work, because we've teased this a lot, and I feel like this is a giant part of his work. And please,
I believe it is. There's quite a lot of Christian themes. Tolkien himself was a Catholic, which wasn't really usual in England.
Lewis was a Church of England.
Yes. So a Protestant of some sorts, but we see many, many different Christian themes in Tolkien's works themselves, not only in the Silmarillion, which is probably like one of the most complex of his works, where he delves deeper into the myth and the legend, but also in general in some of the themes we have like a world that is created around like duality. On one side, of course, we have like darkness, the dark storm clouds that Sauron uses to forebode his armies, when they stand in Minas Tirith, Gandalf and Pippin, I think it was, and they look out and they see, that the storm is coming, and his dark forces, they fight better in the night. We all know that orcs can run better during night than during day. Of course, Uruk-hai are like super soldiers and don't have to do it, but orcs themselves, they benefit greatly from the night. But Gandalf, when he fights the Balrog, for example, in Khazad Dûm, he uses different spells of I think the Flame of Udun he used, which is like he personifies the light. He's in some form. The Lord of the Rings is a fight between light, between day and night, the dark forces, which is quite Christian indeed. Because if we look at the dualism in the Bible, for example, we see of course God in his high heavens, and for some it's regarded, especially for Protestant themes, hell is not really a big concept anymore. But for Tolkien's Catholicism, there's Catholicism in general has quite a dual worldview, between like the hells, but also the planes of humans. If you look, for example, at works of Saint Augustine after the fall of Rome in 476, he had that concept of differing worlds. There's first of all the world of God, the world of heaven, and on the other hand there is the world of hell, or the world of humans too. I think it's Terra Diabolicensis, or so. My Latin isn't that good anymore.
That's all right. Neither is mine.
And that is something that like Tolkien like really put into his work as kind of like a nod to Christianity itself. Just having that eternal fight between the good and the evil. The light forces and the dark forces. But we also have, and that's where we go a bit more into the Silmarillion view, for example, have that concept of like an original sin, of a primeval sin. We as humans, if we read the Bible, we of course have Adam and Eve, eating the apple, of also like Cain and Abel, the first real human kinsman, the first murder, the first death caused on a human by another human. And we have these themes in the Silmarillion too. For example, we have, of course, the first kinslaying at Aqualond, where elves kill elves for the first time. And then, of course, are being banished from like the heavens. Valinor is an entire different continent existing to Middle Earth, which could be interpreted in some way as heaven too, and Middle Earth more or less the land or the domain of humans, also the domain of darkness. And that is just some symbology that is really inside it. But next to Christian themes, of course, we also have pagan themes. Like there's a big pantheon of gods. So I believe, in general, Tolkien more or less, he wanted, of course, to create some kind of mythology, his own mythology.
Well, he
mythology for Britain, wasn't it?
His goal was really to create, I believe it was an interconnected, fantasy. That was his life goal. And also just so people could speak his cool languages.
Yeah, well, cool languages are very cool. But we see that with, modern Christian thoughts as well. Christianity never really completely replaced old pagan religions. They more or less assimilated into the cloak of Christianity, where there are many pagan traditions still existing in many parts of Europe and also the New World that originally, were meant to appease pagan gods, but Christianity more or less took over and unified with and created a symbiosis between old pagan faiths and modern Christian faiths. We can see a similar thing, for example, if we look at Norwegian stave churches. Many of them that still originate from like the medieval periods have carvings of dragons and other mythological beings that really don't exist in Christian theology and mythology.
Well, speaking on this,
over, and that is very interesting. I think.
Well, speaking on this exact subject, recently there was a church, I believe, near Norfolk that was uncovered. They basically they how do you say fixed up the eaves, as in they were doing repairs, and they found right at the top of the church that had been lost for years. A green man, so a pagan folk character, British folklore and folklore around the world, staring across at an angel, which is quite symbolic of the mix between the green man is in the church as much as the angel, and they're both in tandem, and we see this in especially in England, that there's so many mixes of folk traditions, like
wasn't the story of King Arthur wasn't written down by like a monk, a Christian monk, though it originally more or less was about King Arthur, was I think a like Brythonic king, but it was more or less carried over by Christian monks to create also a Christian mythology, and that is so interesting because it unifies different worlds.
Lives in King Arthur was born in Tintagel, which is in Cornwall, which is a Brythonic part of England and not Anglo-Saxon. Whereas, and so Arthur was king of the Britons, king of the Brythonic Britons, and then, he goes to, and then King Arthur becomes a matter of Britain, because each country has a myth that is a matter of something. So I don't know what Germany's is.
Oh, Germany has quite a few. There's like King Barbarossa.
Yeah, a matter of Germany is King Barbarossa. Yeah. And then I think it's Charlemagne is a matter of France.
Oh, also Germany too. I would say Charlemagne is very, and Barbarossa is mostly inspired by like the myth of Barbarossa is inspired by like Charlemagne.
Yeah, and so there's different countries that have their founding myths, but as well, talking about the Christian themes in Tolkien's work, and going back to Khazad-dûm, is that this is the same in C.S. Lewis's work, is which I'll briefly talk about, is that Gandalf, he dies fighting the Balrog, and then he is resurrected. There is, and that's quite a, I would say, and in Narnia there is I believe Aslan, who is kind of seen as this god figure in Narnia. There's the coming. Aslan is on the move. He is back and here to end winter in Narnia. He's the this kind of like, people see him as this kind of playful yet wisdom. He's a playful,
he's like
he's
a
also
prophet,
a lion,
isn't he?
Yeah, he's a prophet, but he's
in some form he's a prophet.
There's scenes where he dances with the children, but a minute later he's leading people. He's to what C.S. Lewis sees as a some sort of a prophet. Yeah, and I would say Gandalf is somewhat of there's this resurrection theme, much like in the Bible, which happens in Narnia and happens in Middle Earth, and so you can clearly see that both men were inspired by these biblical stories.
Definitely, because Gandalf, he had a purpose. He was sent to Middle Earth to have a purpose, which is, more or less guide humans, in the fight against like the dark forces, like the forces that stand in like a completely anti-way to the forces of heaven. He's a messenger of God in some way, and is there to guide man, which is a similar theme that we have in the Bible, especially in the New Testament. Christ was sent, of course, to die for human sins, but also to guide man. When he, for example, says, I think he sends his apostles away to, spread the message of Christ. That is like a similar way of what more or less Gandalf's role was in the Lord of the Rings. He's there to help to guide humans. And there we have like the same theme as we have in the Bible in the Lord of the Rings.
I mean, speaking, more about this, is that because I'd like to, I find this period, especially in literature and English literature, we see a lot of this idea of Christian apologetics, especially Lewis, who during the war was considered the same level of public speaker as Churchill, and he was on what's it called, the radio constantly, because he published so many Christian works. And a lot of these were a defense of, in a way, of Christianity. But then he writes Narnia and gives up writing Christian stories and finds that he's very good at writing children's books. But I wanted to talk more on Christian apologetics, and could you kind of give us I don't know if if you're prepared, but give us sort of a kind of an overview of what Christian apologetics is, and people like Chesterton, or as I said, Lewis, and all these people. Like, what is kind of the tenets? What does it propose? I guess
more or less, it's like redefining faith in a new era, like trying to understand why should you still believe in some way. How do I defend faith in a world that can more or less do without gods? Ever since, for example, the Enlightenment, you can see a man who believes can lead the same life as a man who does not believe. Like, how can you still believe in the modern era? We're just trying to, defend Christianity. And in what way can you still believe? In what capacity can you still believe? And there's, of course, many subsections of Christian apologism, and it talks about many theological like concepts, theodicy, like, can God be almighty? Why is there still suffering in the world? It talks about many different themes, but I think the central theme I would more or less attribute to Christian apologism is more or less just trying to redefine faith in the world that is ever changing, because Christianity, for example, is 2,000 years old. So in what way can it still have relevance in the modern world? And how can we still more or less believe? How can we still, practice faith? I think that's more or less the central topic of it. And this is what most of them are more or less in some form talking about, like just redefining believing.
What is because I know I remember when we were in York, you picked up this book on Chesterton, and what is kind of, because I'm really unfamiliar with Chesterton and his kind of I don't know if you've read that book yet, but do you have any sort of like any views on him? Because I know that he is this key proponent in Christian apologetics.
I think he was a Catholic, wasn't he? I didn't really read most of the book. It's mostly just it's multiple poems of him, with, of course, yes, the most well-known one is the poem of Lepanto. It's the Battle of Lepanto. I think his poems in some form or way were just to bring closer some of the tales and struggles of Christianity to the modern man. I think that's more or less what he tried to achieve with most of his poems. Lepanto, most well-known one, talks about like a battle between the Pope and the Ottoman forces during, yes, I think, the 15th century. I didn't completely read it, and I'm not entirely familiar with Chesterton. I can talk more about other people, but I did. That's more or less what I think his poems tried to achieve. Just let knowledge knowledge in some way can breed faith. If you know more about faith and how to believe, that's when you can actually more from their way turn to God. In their perspective.
Well, I believe that with Lewis and Tolkien, so Lewis, who and Tolkien were absolutely the best of friends until they fell out. And they were incredibly, they were very close because they both, were these Oxford dons in a way, these Oxford like people, and they constantly would talk. And the way that, for example, Tolkien wrote was incredibly, I guess, slow and methodical. Tolkien, he would write these long drafts that would take a long time to write, and he was very, he would sit basically in his house and he wasn't a big socialite, and he would just sort of create his own world. But Lewis was a much more popular figure, to the point where Oxford kind of rejected him, because at a time where people were so rational, he was kind of unrational. But Lewis wrote frantically. He wrote very, very fast, and he could produce a lot of work. And that's kind of, because Narnia is huge. It's 7 books long, which is crazy, and especially for a children's book. But for example, Lewis originally was not a Christian, and I believe, and Tolkien and Lewis obviously were great friends, but Lewis kind of rejected a lot of what Tolkien said, and I believe his quote was, when he was talking about fairy stories to Tolkien, he said, "Fairy stories are lies breathed through silver," which is a really harsh kind of like
There's a harsh criticism. That's like
harsh criticism. But Tolkien eventually turns Lewis round on Christianity. I'm not. By the way, we're not saying this is right or wrong. I'm not trying to say that.
it's all from their perspective.
Yeah, it's all from their perspective.
We neither agree nor disagree with some things they said. So
so
completely unbiased view of them.
So I guess they meet on this one walk. And they have a really this big conversations, and he speaks with him for endlessly, and he had this long night walk with friends, with Tolkien and Hugo Dyson, who is another friend, and Lewis eventually becomes an Anglican, so under the Church of England, but I believe I'm trying to get up. But this is to the disappointment of Tolkien, who hopes he would join the Catholic Church.
Yes.
But I'm trying to find the exact. There's a quote they have. Please talk about something. Is there anything else you wish to talk about while I'm trying to get this up?
Yes, absolutely. I had some good food today.
All right.
Yes, we had some like Turkish bread. That was very tasty.
Yeah, that sounds great. I picked up a new copy of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight from.
And another copy. I thought you already had one.
I don't actually. I have a PDF.
Oh, okay. Like an ebook. Okay.
But I have.
Is it a bound version or is it like a
It's a paperback. Because I was been a good boy and I got points on my Waterstones card, so I got a new because my Hobbit version is at home, so I got one for university. So I got the Hobbit and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight for free. So
that is cool. Why don't you have like a program for that like that in Germany? I would get so many books. I need to come to England again. Fuck.
No, it's pretty good. The Waterstones is a bit of a rip off because it kind of kills old bookshops. Which is.
Do you have any old bookshops in Leeds, like the one we had in Taunton?
Sorry, I'm sure this is very interesting for the viewers, but
absolutely interesting. But everybody likes books, don't they?
Well, yeah, because
there's a podcast about books. Like,
I don't want this podcast to be super incredibly. Here we go. Right.
Sorry, you found it great.
I found the quote. We'll talk about bookshops, and then I'll go back to this quote. But no, we don't. We tend to have we've got the library, the Leeds Library.
Yes, it's beautiful.
Yeah, very stunning. But we don't have any old bookshops. We have an Oxfam, which is this secondary, like just secondhand.
Isn't Oxfam like Isn't that like charity shop basically?
Well, I did find a tiny book for £1 on border ballads, Scottish border ballads, which was really interesting.
That sounds cool, yeah.
And that was like £1. It's this bound book, and it's got all these ballads in it. It's really cool. But I saw Malcolm Geitz working there as well, so it's a good shop.
When I was in Norway, they had like these telephone cells. They repurposed as like
we've got that in our village.
Things. Yeah, we have that in Germany too. And I went into one in Norway, and it was like filled with old books. All these like bound books. I like didn't understand what they were about because I don't speak a single word Norwegian, but it looked so pretty. And in Germany, we have one in my town, and I go there. The books they really offer, and it's books you would purposely put into something like that because maybe you got it from a relative you don't really like. But in the Norwegian one, I was just stunned by like the amount of old, beautiful looking books they had in there. I'd love to learn Norwegian just to be able to go and then actually like find some treasures. But it was just a little thing I wanted to add.
Well, no, because I mean,
a great concept.
I found the wrong quote, but Lewis basically challenges the view that Jesus was this moral teacher, but not a god. And basically he has this he basically tries to mix the idea of he calls it it's called Lewis's trilemma, which is I think it's the idea that it's a big part within Christian apologists, and especially Lewis's work, because he had published so many Christian books. And I believe this is the quote here, but I was wondering what your thoughts are on this, because this is what I was trying to look at. I can't find the exact conversation between him and Tolkien because Obviously, I don't think anyone was walking next to them writing it down, but
A shame.
yeah, there was a guy hiding in like
In the bushes, you know.
Yeah,
like,
this is great.
Oh my god, I'm gonna be famous after that.
Yeah, but this is the quote here. I am trying here to prevent anyone saying that anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I am ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I do not accept his claim to be a god.
Okay, that's interesting.
This is the one thing that we must not say. A man who is merely a man and said the sort of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher, because he would either be a lunatic on the level of a man who has poached an egg, or he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was the son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up as a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him the Lord and God. But let's not come to any patronising nonsense about him being a great human teacher. He has not left us open to us, and he did not intend to. And it goes on to say, although this argument is sometimes called Lewis's trilemma, Lewis did not invent it, rather developed and popularised it. It has also been used by Christian apologist Josh McDowell in his book More Than a Carpenter. It is widely been repeated in Christian apologetic literature, but largely ignored by professional theologians and biblical scholars. I mean, how do you interpret this quote? What are your thoughts, I guess?
Well, it's mostly about, Christian thought as a whole, more or less, and I'm talking about mostly, I think, Protestant thought, the one that I was taught mostly, talks about being Jesus to be, he was completely divine, 100% divine, but also 100% human. So he was a human, but also a god, but also fully human in some way, like it's a dilemma itself, it's a paradox itself, because he can't be fully two things, because then he only half one thing and half another thing, can't be more than 100%. And I think he's basically talking about how just because the things Jesus said, which, you can think for yourself, judge you for yourself for what he said, he was a good moral teacher, if the things he said were bad. But I think he's mostly talking about that just because he said something that could be seen as he was a prophet, yeah, of course, but prophets don't have to be completely human. Like, for example, don't have to be completely divine. If you look at Isaiah, for example, from the book of Isaiah in the Bible, he's also a prophet and not a son of God, if you know what I mean. Like, just because you are a prophet, just because you say relevant things that bring your faith forward and bring people to some kind of light of God, return them to the light of something, doesn't have to mean that they are, divine beings. Humans can have the capacity to think and speak and do for themselves, and don't need really maybe even godly guidance for that. We can see that in the modern world too. Just because somebody gives everything he has to charity doesn't mean he has like a son of, he is not a son of God. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just because people do good things doesn't mean that they're completely divine, that they're divine sent beings. They can be great and do great things and be fantastic and do everything that's written in the Bible, but still they are humans, and they are not gods, and they are not son of gods. They are what they are. They are humans. And if we see Jesus as I don't know what he's talking about, the madman thing, but I don't really have that much. I don't know that code. I didn't know that code before you brought it up today.
Well, no, I just thought I'd give it a go. I thought I'd catch you off guard.
Yeah, you caught me off guard, but maybe that's what he's meaning. I don't know.
Well,
Tolkien was a weird man.
Tolkien on another note was a devout Roman Catholic from boyhood. He did not have the same journey that Lewis had.
That's true.
Where Lewis kind of was reluctant and then sort of, I guess, submerges himself within it. But he described The Lord of the Rings as a fundamentally religious Catholic work, unconsciously so first, but consciously in revision. Yes. He insisted it was not an allegory, but it contains numerous themes from Christian theology, which is, I find Tolkien's work, I find the way he talks about his work really silly, because he'll say something like, not silly, but he was a contradictory man, because he'll go, there is nothing about the war in this book, and then he'll write something that's like clearly inspired by it. Which is,
I think there's like a thing where he was like really mad about people like seeing allegories in his work.
Yeah,
I think there was like some interview or something where he was like really mad about that, or like some quote about that. It's like, they're obviously allegories to the Bible, to numerous other Christian works, and to Christian theology and theology as a whole. So yeah, he was quite contradictory when it comes to talking about his own work and the impact of his own work. Definitely.
Well, I mean, Tolkien as well was he was quite a reclusive figure. He was popular. He was well liked. He wasn't an asshole, but he was just not. I guess he was much more confined to. I mean, originally, as we said in the last episode, he wrote The Hobbit just for his kids, basically.
Yes. As a bedtime story. I would love to hear a bedtime story like that.
Yeah, imagine that. Imagine your bedtime stories was by J.R.R. Tolkien. That's pretty crazy. But
I want to talk me to sleep.
But he what was I going to say? But later in life, he would receive numerous fan letters and loads of things like that. But he wasn't able to reply because either he wouldn't have time or they'd just get lost, and he'd reply weeks later. So he wasn't. He's a very like writer's writer in a way that he wasn't. He was interested in what he was interested in, and as well. Obviously, we're talking about the linguistics in the last episode.
Yes, which languages.
I had a list of all the languages that he knew, and he knew Ancient Greek, Old English, Norse, Gothic, Welsh, and Finnish.
That is such an incredible assortment of languages.
Well, I mean,
find somebody who speaks all of these languages nowadays.
I just like that Gothic and Finnish are next to each other.
Yeah, Gothic and Finnish. It's just like, I mean, I understand Finnish because if you read some of his, outside of the Lord of the Rings, he had to be able to know Finnish, because there's some very, very, there's a lot of Finnish folklore in some of his other works.
Oh, really?
Yes. The Children of Húrin, it's basically my favorite work from Tolkien, is really based upon the Finnish folk hero of Kalevala, I think he's called. With the themes of, I think, slaying a dragon and the entire fall of Turin Turambar. He ultimately marries, I think, his own sister and conceives a child with her. It's really fucked up, I'm sorry. And then he commits suicide by, I think, killing himself with the sword that before that killed his best friend.
God.
Yes, it's an incredibly dark story. Genuinely, I think it's the darkest story Tolkien has ever written.
Well, because I've only read the as I said, I've only read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, you should definitely read The Children of Húrin.
Why The Children of Húrin? Why does it need to be read? Come on.
Just because it shows you a completely different view of Tolkien's works. You always have the Hobbit is, the good guys win ultimately. It's the ring is destroyed in the Lord of the Rings. The Lonely Mountain is recaptured by the dwarves. Of course, Thorin falls, but ultimately he sees, his own errors, his greed is being swept away, that all his family before had, the greed for gold and that sickness that all the dwarves of his house more or less inherited. He, of course, dies, but ultimately everything is fine in the end. Of course, not everything is great. In Lord of the Rings, the elves leave, and that's very, very sad. But in The Children of Húrin, the only thing that really happens, which is happy, is that the dragon of Glaurung is slain. Everything else leads from disaster to disaster. He destroyed, basically, by his doing, the elven kingdom of Nargothrond. Yes, it was Nargothrond, where everybody inside basically died. Thousands of elves died. With Húrin, his father, being freed from Morgoth after his son died by his own hand. He then more or less reveals the ancient elven kingdom of Gondolin to Morgoth himself, which leads to its demise. And ultimately, his entire kin died.
In the first age, is it?
Yes, it's in the first age.
Yes.
It's a completely different subject, and just shows that Tolkien can write really well tales that are not meant for a young audience, tales that can be dark, tales that can be full of despair, and not really full of hope like we have in The Lord of the Rings, which is a tale about small people doing great things, and even at the lowest point of their lives, they can still find hope and pick themselves up and do a task that was just greater than them, to save everybody around them, to do something much, much greater than their own lives are, But
well, I think
The Children of Húrin is much more down to earth and much sadder, much more filled with despair, much more human at that. And it's very much based upon as has had the finished folk hero of Kalevala. That's probably why he had to learn the language, just to retell the story in a different frame.
Well, I was wrong that Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is not a book that Tolkien wrote. It's a translation that he did. That I got that completely wrong last episode. But I mean, I think the reason that Tolkien's work, especially now, is so fantastic is that we live in so much literature now is so dark. And
yes,
like Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire, for example, is such a...
It's incredibly mature and dark and nasty.
But I feel like there's something about the enjoyment of reading Tolkien's work, especially the Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, that there's such a hope. There's such a love of seeing people succeed. And furthermore, the idea of fellowship, which is, as we said, quite a Christian idea.
Yes.
And there's so many characters within Lord of the Rings that parallel with Christian characters in the Bible, as we spoke about with Gandalf. I would say there's a couple of Judas Iscariots in there as well.
A couple, yes.
Yeah, I'd say Boromir is sort of the most prevalent one, but I don't know if that's just.
Oh no, Boromir.
I don't know.
It's a very, very divided character.
Yeah, Boromir is a complex character.
He redeems himself in a way that Judas in the Bible never did.
Yes. Well, then who would be the Judas?
Maybe Boromir is more of a Patras.
Yes.
The person who still denies, Patras itself denied Christ after he was found 3 times, and in the end ultimately redeemed himself. More or less an apostle, a part of the fellowship. Who would be a true Judas? Good question. Grima Wormtongue?
Yes. Yeah.
Probably. Ultimately, he kills Saruman, but is that really redemption? He was killed.
Yeah.
He died, and he almost brought an entire kingdom to fall. Definitely, I would say, in some form, that's Grima Wormtongue. Maybe also in some form Denethor, because does Denethor ever redeem himself? He kills himself, really. He throws himself off Minas Tirith, only before almost killing his only son. Basically botching the entire defense of Minas Tirith. I don't know. It's he's also a very, very weird character. But Boromir is different because there's still so much good in him. He does mistakes, but he acknowledges his mistakes and then dies for them, dies for his own consequences. When he's killed by the arrows, by the black arrows.
Yes.
He fights, he carries on, he more or less tries to help the hobbits, and he warns everybody. He warns Aragorn and Legolas. He gives Frodo and Sam afterwards, maybe unconsciously, enough time to carry on the journey alone, and he holds off the orcs from finding the ring. So he's more or less, he's a weird character, definitely. One that is neither good nor bad. He's probably very human. He's probably the most human character in the entire work. But
because we see the with Sam and Frodo, there's this I would say Sam and Frodo are some of the best written characters in literature. They're so likable, but they're not Mary Sue's. They're not these they're not totally good. There's some there is some conflict, and there's I believe it is in the Two Towers. I don't know why I said that so short. The Two Towers.
Two Towers.
I think it's when they say about they said they wish that that their story will become a legend or become like a ballad.
Yes.
I think it's
Two Towers,
and I mean just that. Yes, and then we come to some rest and some sleep," said Sam. He laughed grimly. And I mean just that, Mr. Frodo. I mean, played an ordinary rest and sleep, and waking up to a morning's work in the garden. I'm afraid that's what I'm hoping for all the time. A big important plans are not for my sort. Still, I wonder if we ever should be put into songs or tales. In one of those, but we're in one of those, of course. But I mean, put to words. Told by a fireplace and read out of a great big book with red and black letters years and years afterwards. And I love that
tales that really matter.
Yeah, I love that in Lord of the Rings there's this constant idea of one that I think we missed last time. That I know I'm going off track a bit here, but about the continuation that they are just a small section in a greater story.
Yes.
There's so many moments in the
But
books.
also like the fall from something greater,
Exactly.
They are only, fighting the fight against Sauron, though there was a much greater evil, Morgoth, where the big battle was, where he was slain by basically angels from another continent. Yes, there's definitely something to it. They want to live up to something. They want the tales to be told too, because that's the tale. They were told similar tales probably as children themselves. Of course, in the Lord of the Rings. Bilbo told the children on the fireplace the story about how he encountered the trolls. In the Troll Heights. Before they came to Rivendell, and how he outsmarted them, basically how Gandalf outsmarted them, and maybe they just are being thrown back to these stories and think maybe we're not too different, and they hear all these tales from lands that are long gone, drowned by the oceans, and in some form they want their struggles to be acknowledged, maybe,
But
to be
it's such a
understood.
human thing that I just absolutely love that. I think this section speaks not only just to Sam and Frodo, but to everyone in Lord of the and everyone in the world, is that there is this kind of thing of Frodo and Sam are doing this obviously because it is right, and they know that it's the right thing to do, and they've been entrusted, and they must do it, and they must do it for the sake of Middle Earth and themselves. And there's constant reminders if they don't think they'll make it home. But this moment is such a human moment, going, well, even though we're selfless and we're doing it, wouldn't it be so cool if we were these, like, you know what I mean? Everyone does that.
Everyone would like that. I would be like to talk. My life should be told by a fireplace, though.
Yeah, exactly. They want not the fame, but it's the thing of, oh, wouldn't it be so cool if we were, we went back and everyone thought we were great. And I think there's
people want to be acknowledged in some way, don't they? Nobody wants the memories to die. It's always like, oh, when I don't know, my grandparents tell me tales of their grandparents or something, I myself think maybe my grandchildren or grandchildren will tell the tales of me at some point.
But
I think it's so innately human.
But you can see that Tolkien loves this tale telling, because he never read anything, I think, past Shakespeare. In modern literature, he was strictly concerned with Beowulf and.
Yes, he was the greatest Beowulf translator.
This is a giant. Well, I like Seamus Heaney as well, but he's great. But there's this Tolkien in Beowulf, for example. In a lot of modern literature, we hear the characters' internal thoughts and what they feel and why they're doing something. But Tolkien's characters, like Beowulf, are people who speak through actions. Aragorn was criticised when the book came out for being wooden, for being a character that didn't say much, who didn't have any. We didn't get a sense of how he felt. But that's because
it's the actions that matter.
But that's what Tolkien was used to in Beowulf, is these, and in Icelandic sagas, are these people who, it's not about the internal thoughts of what they're doing, it's what they're saying, and it's what they are doing, not what they are thinking. And that's something that's really different to something like A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, where it's based on the characters making these grand decisions and sat behind tables, discussing and espionage,
great dialogues, and
but Tolkien is, I think, much more concerned with telling a tale and creating characters that stick around, not because they're complex, but because they did such cool deeds in a way, such things that you want to read about. No one wants to read about.
Something that comes to light is when Aragorn first comes to Minas Tirith. In I think the third book, and he refuses to enter the city gates, basically to be crowned as king before that. It was after the final battle, basically, before all the wounded were tended to. He only entered the city to cure the people from that one shadow blight that was more or less put upon them by, I think, the Witch King of Angmar that was slain during the Battle of Minas Tirith. He only comes into the city at first to cure these people of their ailments. And afterwards, once everything is done, basically, he ascends to the throne of Minas Tirith. So it's like his action, he wishes to be safe. He wishes the people, his subjects, basically, around him, to be safe first, before he put himself in the limelight of becoming that great king. And that's just, I think, an action from him that really matters and that makes him stick around and also shows you who he really is and how he thinks about the people around him. I think that was just such a great deed that it shows you what kind of person he is. It shows you what kind of king he wishes to be. Yeah, that's what comes to my mind.
Exactly, and Sam goes on to say furthermore that things are that at the end of this big speech, I think he says, and I think this is on the stairs before they get to the Mount Doom. Is it Ghoul or something? The stairs are called.
The Stairs of Sirith Ungol, yes. That's before they get to the Tower of Sirith Ungol, yes.
That's it. And he says, things are done over and over and made into parts of great tales. Things are done and over and made into a part of great tales are different. Sorry, I don't know if I read that right. Made into part of great tales that are different. Why, even Gollum might be good in a tale, better than he is to you. Anyway, he used to like tales himself once, by his own account. I wonder if he thinks he's a hero or a villain. That even these characters that are in it's a very meta moment that they're musing on, almost kind of judging the question to the viewer that are these characters a hero or a villain to you as well, and that Gollum could have his very own tale. It's a very meta moment in the book, and I don't know. I think that that Tolkien's work is so deep that we could spend pretty much a whole podcast diving into.
Probably, yes.
Probably.
But, we can always bring up Tolkien again and again.
I'm sure we will. As much as I brought up pipe smoking in the last episode.
We can have an entire episode to pipe smoking. I don't mind.
Yes.
We have so many things to talk about. So many great things to talk about.
And the last kind of topic that I wanted to bring up is the idea of this is the final. We've got two sides. We've got light and good, as we said earlier, yes. And much like the war, and much like what we see all around us is that the evil forces, so Sauron and the orcs, are driven together by totalitarianism and
yes.
And a commanding force and something that is they effectively are dogmatic, whereas I guess Gondor and Rohan and the elves, they are fundamentally different, and it takes them a long time to come together. But once they do, they are unified by their differences and unified by a strive for a better world. In a way, they all want a better world. They all want to survive, basically, and that's a parallel, especially to the war, the Second World War, and as well just a really great moral kind of thing that being dogmatic and following this blind belief, is far worse to putting aside differences and understanding and trying to connect those bridges, which is so, I just think, is such a poignant kind of overarching theme. And I think that's the last overarching theme in Tolkien's work I really wanted to tackle. But yeah,
well, it's really modern, like following some kind of ideology, following some great dogma instead of actually tackling the real goal, like things that exist and coming to understandings with also people from opposite sides. That's maybe something that many people nowadays could live by. Not to become too political, of course, but I think everybody values peace and understanding over following blind ideologies to spread hate and misunderstanding and whatnot. I think everybody likes some peace and everybody likes friendship and companionship.
Exactly. And I think it's I mean that's kind of all I had to say about Tolkien, and I think, I don't know if you wanted to say anything else. I'm sure you could,
there's not that much to add more, is there?
No, but that
we have many episodes coming up.
Yes.
We can also talk about Tolkien in some capacity.
I believe we were going to do some episodes maybe on Roland, or maybe the Song of Roland.
Yes, especially the Song of Roland. We can talk about Tolkien there too.
Well, we can even do a mini episode on the Song of Roland if you guys are interested, and we'll do some other literary episodes. I believe we've got some more wacky stuff coming up. Well, I'll bring on some other people. We'll talk maybe about TV writing or things like this, because I don't want this podcast to be some sort of highbrow thing. We can talk about anything on this. We can even talk about flipping, I don't know, porn mags. If
yeah, great.
Yeah,
I'm most versed in that.
No, but we'll have to. But yeah, thank you guys for listening. And the first episode was a little bit shaky, but I feel like we're on stronger ground here, and I feel like
everybody is learning, and we are too. And as long the longer this takes, the more episodes there will be out, the more proficient we will become at actually talking about topics that are.
So bear with us.
Bear with us. Yeah.
Yeah, but
it's a good motto.
I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for listening along, and we'll see you guys in the next one, and it will be something different. We'll do a non-Tolkien subject.
Oh God, that's possible.
We'll fuck it all up. We'll have no research. All right, I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.
We'll just talk about goodbye.